Hello and welcome. Settle in, get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights. Tonight, we aren't just telling a story. We are embarking on an expedition into the heart of an enigma. We're traveling to a place frozen in time, not merely by the unforgiving embrace of the Siberian winter, but by a question mark so large, so profound, that it has haunted investigators, storytellers, and armchair detectives for over 60 years. We, as humans, are wired for answers. We crave resolution. When faced with a puzzle, we feel an innate compulsion to solve it, to fit the pieces together until a clear picture emerges. It's what drives science, what fuels investigation, what gives us a sense of order in a chaotic universe. But what happens when the pieces don't fit? What happens when every piece seems to come from a different box, each one telling a conflicting story? What do we do when we are left with a narrative so fractured, so utterly baffling, that logic itself seems to crumble? This is one of those stories. It's a journey into the heart of one of the 20th century's most infamous and chilling unsolved deaths. It begins with the bright-eyed optimism of youth, with camaraderie and courage, and it ends in a tableau of such bizarre horror that it defies any single rational explanation. It is a story that forces us to confront the terrifying possibility that there are things in this world that we are simply not equipped to understand. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. To truly grasp the weight of this infamous chapter in the annals of Russian mysteries, we must first transport ourselves back in time. The year is 1959. The world is cleaved in two by the Iron Curtain, and the Cold War is at its glacial peak. The Soviet Union, a superpower forged in revolution and war, projects an image of unshakable strength, scientific progress, and collective will. This is the era of Sputnik, of Yuri Gagarin waiting in the wings, an era where the state's power felt absolute and its reach limitless. Life for the average citizen was one of conformity and control, but also one of immense national pride. And one of the most celebrated, state-sanctioned pastimes for the nation's youth was something called sports tourism. This wasn't a casual weekend camping trip. This was a grueling, high-stakes test of human endurance. These expeditions involved multi-day treks through the country's most vast and punishing landscapes, the taiga, the Caucasus, and of course, the ancient, formidable Ural Mountains. To participate was a mark of honor. It meant you were strong, skilled, and ideologically sound. The participants were not reckless amateurs. They were highly trained, meticulously prepared, and certified masters of survival, skiing, and mountaineering. They were the best of the best. Our story centers on one such group, 10 students and recent graduates from the Ural Polytechnical Institute in the bustling industrial city of Sverdlovsk, now known as Ekaterinburg. They were all young, in their early 20s, with the exception of one older, enigmatic member. They were friends, classmates, athletes, and adventurers, united by a shared passion for the wilderness. Together, they were planning their most ambitious trek yet, a 16-day, 300-kilometer journey through the forbidding northern Urals. Their ultimate goal was to reach a mountain named Gorau Torton. In the language of the indigenous Mansi people who have roamed these lands for centuries, the name Otorton is sometimes translated as, "Don't go there," a chilling piece of foreshadowing, if there ever was one. The leader of this expedition, the man whose name would become forever synonymous with the tragedy, was a 23-year-old engineering student named Igor Dyatlov. By all accounts, Dyatlov was the epitome of a competent leader. He was quiet, serious, and known for his incredibly meticulous planning. He was a seasoned hiker, having led numerous challenging expeditions before. For this trip, he assembled a team of his peers, all of whom were officially designated Grade 2 hikers. This was a serious accomplishment, just one step shy of the highest possible certification, Grade 3. This expedition was meant to be their final test, the crucible through which they would earn that coveted rank. Let's take a moment to meet them, because it is crucial that we remember them not as victims in a file, but as the vibrant, hopeful people they were. Their individual stories are the threads that make up this complex and tragic tapestry. First, Igor Dyatlov, the leader. He was a gifted radio engineering student, known for designing and building his own radios and a small, portable stove that the group carried with them. He was respected, if a bit reserved. His journals show a methodical mind, constantly calculating, planning, ensuring the safety of his friends. Then there was Zinaida Kolmogorova, known to her friends as Zina. At 22, she was a vibrant, energetic, and beloved member of the group. Her own journal from the trip is one of the most detailed and personal accounts we have of their final days. She was an experienced hiker in her own right and had once been in a relationship with Dyatlov, though they remained close friends. Ludmila Dubinina, or Luda, was just 20 years old, the youngest woman in the group. She was known for her incredible toughness and high spirits, a firecracker who often sang and joked to keep morale high. An iconic photo from a previous trip shows her playfully holding a piece of foraged meat, a testament to her resilient and joyful nature. She was studying economics and was a fierce and loyal friend. Alexander Kolevatov, 24, was a student of nuclear physics at a highly secure institute. He was described as quiet, reserved, and dependable. His background in a sensitive, secretive field would later become a key point of speculation in the investigation. Rustam Slobodin, 23, was an engineering graduate, known for his formidable physical strength and good nature. He was the son of a professor and was considered one of the most athletic members of the group, often seen at the front of the line, breaking trail through the deep snow. The two Yuris, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonischenko. They were 21 and 23, respectively, and were close friends, the jokers of the expedition. Doroshenko was a student of radio engineering like Dyatlov. Krivonischenko, also an engineering graduate, had a significant detail in his past. He had worked at the infamous Mayak nuclear facility, the site of a major disaster in 1957. This fact, like Kolevatov's background, would later cast a long, radioactive shadow over the case. Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles, at 23, had one of the most interesting and tragic backstories. He was the son of a French communist engineer who had moved to Russia, only to be arrested and executed during Stalin's Great Purge. Nikolai was born in a labor camp but had risen above his difficult start to become a popular and well-liked civil engineering graduate. And finally, there was the outlier, the man who didn't quite fit, Semyon Zolotaryov. At 38, he was significantly older than the students. He introduced himself as Alexander, though his documents said Semyon. He was a combat veteran of World War II, a physical education instructor who had specifically requested to join Dyatlov's group to earn his Grade 3 hiking certification. He was a stranger to most of them, and some found him a bit odd. He had a collection of gold teeth, a common sight in post-war Russia, but he also had a number of strange tattoos, including the name Gina, a 5-pointed star, and a skull and crossbones. His presence added a layer of mystery to the group even before they set foot on the mountain. The 10th member, who would become the sole, unwitting survivor, was 21-year-old Yuri Yudin. He was a geology student and a close friend to many in the group. On January 23, 1959, the 10 hikers, brimming with anticipation, boarded a train from Sverdlovsk. The early days of their journey are meticulously documented in the journals and photographs they left behind. These artifacts are a poignant time capsule, preserving their final days of innocence. We see black and white shots of smiling, ruddy faces, bundled in heavy winter gear. We see them skiing through majestic, snow-covered forests, building makeshift shelters, and crowding around their small stove for warmth. Zena's journal entries are full of life. She writes about the songs they sang, the friendly debates they had, the breathtaking beauty of the sea of fir trees around them. There's an overwhelming sense of camaraderie, a purity of purpose that makes what's to come all the more devastating. A few days into the trip, on January 28th, at a small village outpost, fate intervened. Yuri Yudin, who had been struggling with a flare-up of chronic sciatica and rheumatism, made the difficult decision to turn back. The pain in his leg and back had become unbearable. It was a heartbreaking moment. He said his goodbyes, entrusting a collection of geological samples to the group to leave for him at the institute. He hugged his friends, wished them luck, and in doing so, unknowingly, saved his own life. He would be the last person to see the other 9 alive. As he watched them ski away, disappearing as small specks into the vast white expanse, he had no idea he was witnessing the beginning of a legend, and that he would spend the rest of his life haunted by his survival, forever seeking answers for his lost friends. The remaining 9 pressed on, led by Igor Dyatlov, deeper into the desolate heart of the Urals. According to Dyatlov's own meticulously planned route and the final journal entries, they were scheduled to make their way over a specific pass towards Mount Otorten. On February 1st, they began their ascent of a mountain that stood in their way. In the modern day, it is known as Kolet. But to the Mansi people, its name has a far more ominous ring, Dead Mountain. The name wasn't, as folklore might suggest, due to an ancient curse or a string of past tragedies. It was named for its barren, windswept slopes, a place where game was scarce and life struggled to take hold. Still, the name hangs heavy over this story, a grim moniker for the place where 9 vibrant lives would be extinguished. That day, the weather, which had been manageable, turned against them with a vengeance. A blizzard blew in from the north, a classic Siberian storm with howling winds and driving snow. Visibility dropped to near zero. In the whiteout, they lost their bearings, veering west of their intended pass and onto the exposed slope of Dead Mountain. And here, Igor Dyatlov made a decision that has puzzled mountaineering experts for decades. Instead of retreating down the slope to the relative shelter of the treeline, which was only about 1.5 miles away, he decided to make camp for the night right there, on the open, exposed mountainside. It was a baffling choice for a leader of his experience. Camping on an open slope is colder, more dangerous, and offers no protection from the wind. It goes against standard winter survival protocol. Why did he do it? Was it a simple navigational error compounded by fatigue? Did he misjudge their position in the storm? Or was it a deliberate choice? Some have speculated he wanted to practice camping on a difficult, high-altitude slope as part of their Grade 3 training. Others wonder if some unseen factor forced their hand. We will never know. Whatever the reason, they pitched their large military-grade tent, designed to sleep all 9 of them. The last coherent entries in their journals were made. They likely shared a sparse meal of crackers and salo, a type of cured pork fat. One of the last photos recovered from their cameras shows them digging the platform for the tent into the snow. They look cold, tired, but determined. And then, at some point during the cold, dark, storm-lashed night of February 1st, or perhaps in the early hours of February 2nd, something happened. Something so terrifying, so immediate, so utterly incomprehensible, that it caused these 9 experienced, rational, and tough-as-nails mountaineers to do the unthinkable. The group was due to send a telegram from their final destination, the village of Vizhai, on or around February 12th. When the 12th came and went with no word, there was an immediate panic. Delays in these kinds of extreme expeditions were common. A blizzard could easily hold a group up for several days. But as the days bled into a week, and then more, the families of the hikers grew frantic. They pressured the authorities, and on February 20th, A full-scale search and rescue operation was finally launched. It was a massive undertaking, involving volunteer students, university staff, the army, and aircraft. For 6 long, agonizing days, they found nothing. The vast, white wilderness of the Urals seemed to have swallowed the group whole. The landscape was a monolithic blanket of white, hiding all secrets. Then, on February 26th, a search pilot, flying low over the slopes of Koletsyakhl, spotted something. A dark shape, a collapsed smudge against the snow. It was the tent. And it is here, at the discovery of this tent, that our story shifts irrevocably from a tragic tale of missing hikers into one of the most enduring and bizarre unsolved deaths in modern history. The scene that greeted the ground search party was the first, and perhaps most crucial, piece of this impossible puzzle. The tent was half torn down and buried in snow, clearly abandoned. But it wasn't the weight of the snow or the force of the wind that had brought it down. The searchers quickly realized that the tent had been sliced open, violently, from the inside. Someone, or some people, inside that tent had been so desperate to get out that they hadn't even taken the precious seconds to undo the entrance flaps. They had slashed through the thick, durable canvas with a knife or a similar sharp object. Inside the tent, the scene was one of eerie, frozen order. Everything was left behind. Their backpacks, their spare clothes, their boots, their warm coats, their food supplies, their money, even their skis propped up outside. It was as if they had fled in a single, panicked instant, abandoning the very tools that were essential for survival in the brutal -30°C, -22°F weather. This was not a rational, planned evacuation. This was a flight of pure, primal terror. A flashlight, left on top of the tent, was found to be switched on, its batteries dead. Outside the tent, the searchers discovered a trail of footprints in the snow, preserved by the cold. 8 or 9 sets of them. They led away from the tent, heading down the steep slope, not towards their planned route, but towards the distant safety of the treeline a mile away. The footprints told a chilling story of their own. The forensic analysis revealed that some of the hikers were wearing only socks. Some were wearing a single felt valenki, a type of traditional boot. Some were completely barefoot. Pause and imagine that for a moment. You are a seasoned mountaineer. You understand the brutal calculus of survival in the Arctic cold. You know that without proper footwear and warm clothing, frostbite is not a risk. It is a certainty. Death is a matter of hours, if not minutes. What could you possibly see, hear, or feel that would make you cut your way out of your only shelter and run barefoot into a Siberian blizzard in the dead of night? What threat could be more terrifying than the certainty of freezing to death? The tracks continued in a strangely orderly, side-by-side fashion for about 500 meters, as if the group was walking down together, perhaps trying to stay calm. Then the tracks scattered, as if the group had separated or the initial order had broken down into chaos. The search party followed the trail down to the edge of the forest. And there, under the sheltering branches of a giant, ancient cedar tree, they found the first signs of the hikers themselves. They discovered the remains of a small, hastily made fire. And next to it, they found the first 2 bodies. Yuri Krivonischenko and Yuri Doroshenko. They were stripped down to their underwear. Their hands and feet were blackened by frostbite. Their hands were also torn, bruised, and covered in scrapes, suggesting they had desperately tried to keep the fire going, perhaps by frantically breaking off lower branches from the cedar tree. An examination of the cedar tree itself revealed something even stranger. Branches high up on the tree, up to 5 meters off the ground, were broken off. This suggested that someone had tried to climb the tree. Why? Were they trying to get a better view to look for the tent? Were they trying to signal for help? Or were they trying to escape something on the ground? The official cause of death for both men was determined to be hypothermia. A tragic, but in these circumstances, understandable end. But it did not explain why they were nearly naked, or what they had run from in the first place. The search continued, radiating out from the cedar tree. About 300 meters from the tree, back up the slope in the direction of the abandoned tent, the searchers found the body of Igor Dyatlov, the group's leader. He was lying on his back, his head pointed towards the camp. One hand was clutching a small birch branch. The other was raised to his face as if to shield himself. His posture was frozen in a moment of struggle, suggesting he had been trying to crawl back to the very shelter he had so desperately fled. Not far from him they found Zina Kolmogorova. Her body was also frozen in a similar pose of grim determination, a tableau of a final, failed attempt to get back to the relative safety of the tent. She was more fully dressed than the men at the cedar tree, but still inadequately. Her face was covered in blood, though the source was not a major wound. A little further up the slope, closer still to the tent, was Rustam Slobodin. He was also found in a posture that suggested he was crawling back. An autopsy would later reveal that he had a small 1.5 centimeter fracture in his skull. The doctors at the time said it was not a fatal injury and was likely caused by a fall or a blow as he stumbled through the dark, but it adds another layer to the mystery. Like the others, the official cause of death for all three, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin, was ruled as hypothermia. So far, we have a story, however strange, of panic, flight, and a tragic succumbing to the elements. It's a horrific hiking tragedy, but the core mystery, the reason for the initial flight, remains the central, maddening question. But the search wasn't over. For hikers were still missing. For 2 long, frustrating months, the search parties scoured the area. The snow was incredibly deep, in some places over 20 feet. The official investigation was on the verge of being closed, the fate of the remaining 4 to be sealed by the mountain. Then, on May 4th, as the spring thaw finally began to melt the deep snows, the final and most horrifying discovery was made. About 75 meters from the cedar tree, deeper into the woods and buried under more than 4 meters of snow and running water in a ravine, they found them. The remaining 4 hikers, Nikolai Thibeaux-Brignoles, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolevatov, and Ludmila Dubinina. They had clearly tried to build a makeshift snow den for shelter, a sign of rational thought returning after the initial panic. And it is here, with these last 4 bodies, that the Dyatlov Pass incident transforms from a confounding mystery into the stuff of absolute nightmares. These 4 were better dressed than the others. In fact, it appeared they had taken some of the clothing from their dead comrades by the cedar triological, if grim, act of survival in a desperate situation. But it is their injuries that shatter any simple explanation and propel this case into the realm of the truly inexplicable. Nikolai Thibeaux-Brignoles had suffered a massive, crushing skull fracture, a complex web of breaks so severe that pieces of bone were driven into his brain. Ludmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov had both suffered catastrophic, symmetrical chest fractures. Multiple ribs on both sides of their bodies were shattered, leading to massive internal hemorrhaging. The attending medical examiner, a man named Dr. Boris Vozrozdeny, was adamant in his report. He stated that the force required to inflict such injuries was far beyond what another human being could inflict. He compared the damage to the kind of force generated by a high-speed car crash or the shock wave from a powerful explosion. And here is the most baffling detail of all. Despite these devastating, bone-shattering internal injuries, their bodies showed almost no external signs of trauma. There were no significant bruises, no cuts, no soft tissue damage that you would absolutely expect from such a violent impact. It was as if they had been squeezed, crushed by some immense, invisible, and impossibly precise force. But the horror does not stop there. When they examined Ludmila Dubinina, they made a grotesque discovery. Her tongue was missing. Her eyes and parts of her lips were also gone. Semyon Zolotaryov was also found to be missing his eyeballs. The initial report simply noted that this soft tissue was missing, but offered no conclusive explanation. The official investigation was now faced with an impossible, contradictory set of facts. You have one group of hikers who seemingly died of hypothermia while trying to return to their tent, and another group found just meters away who died from injuries so violent they resembled a bomb blast, yet with no external signs of a struggle or impact. And then there's the matter of the missing soft tissue and the radioactive contamination. Yes, radiation. To make things even stranger, two more bizarre pieces of evidence emerged. First, several items of the hikers' clothing, particularly the sweaters worn by Dubinina and Kolevatov, were found to be significantly radioactive. Not lethally so, but emitting levels of beta radiation far higher than the normal background levels. Where did this radiation come from? Krivonischenko and Kolevatov had both worked in the nuclear industry, but the contamination was found on clothing that had been shared among the group in the ravine. Second, there were the lights. During the period the hikers were missing, from February into March, other ski groups and even official meteorological stations in the region, some 50 kilometers to the south, reported seeing strange, bright orange spheres or fireballs moving silently and swiftly across the night sky. The lead criminal investigator on the case, a man named Lev Ivanov, would later claim in the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, that he was ordered by high-ranking regional Communist Party officials to close the case and classify all the files. He was explicitly told to attribute the deaths to an overwhelming natural force. Ivanov gave an interview saying he had always personally believed that these flying spheres were directly connected to the hikers' deaths. He admitted that his superiors were worried about the reports and that the entire area was a known hotspot for UFO sightings and, more importantly, secret military tests. The official verdict, delivered in late May 1959, was deliberately, frustratingly vague. It concluded that the hikers had died because they encountered a compelling natural force which they were unable to overcome. The case was closed. The files were sent to a secret archive. Public access was denied. For 30 years, the story was suppressed, surviving only as a whispered legend among local hikers and climbers, a ghost story told around campfires. But a story this strange, this compelling, can't stay buried forever. And now we are left where Lev Ivanov and his team were in 1959, with a collection of impossible facts and no coherent narrative to connect them. This is why the Dyatlov Pass incident has become the ultimate obsession for those who love Russian mysteries. It's a true-life horror story with no final chapter. So, let's do what countless people have done for 6 decades. Let's step into the role of investigator. Let's examine the theories, from the most rational to the most outlandish, and see if we can find one that fits. Let's begin with the most widely accepted scientific explanation, the one that the Russian government has officially endorsed in recent years: an avalanche. The theory goes that a specific type of avalanche, a delayed slab avalanche, occurred. This is where a large plate of snow, weakened by katabatic winds and fresh snowfall, suddenly slides down. The initial cut they made in the snow to pitch the tent could have created the fracture point. This would explain the sudden, panicked exit. The roaring sound and the pressure of the snow hitting the tent would have been terrifying. It could also, proponents argue, explain the severe internal injuries seen on the 4 in the ravine, who might have been caught in the main force of the slide and buried deep. The hikers would have cut their way out, disoriented and panicked, and fled downhill to escape being buried alive. It sounds plausible, doesn't it? It's a compelling natural force. It provides a single, naturalistic cause for the initial event. But there are major, glaring problems with the avalanche theory. The original search party, which included experienced mountaineers, found no evidence of a recent avalanche. The tent itself wasn't fully buried or swept away. It was just collapsed. An avalanche powerful enough to inflict those car crash-like injuries would have obliterated the site and carried the victims much further down the slope. Furthermore, the slope where they camped had an incline of less than 30 degrees, generally considered not steep enough for a natural slab avalanche to occur. The footprints leading away from the tent were also strangely orderly at first, not the chaotic, desperate scramble you would expect from people fleeing a life-threatening torrent of snow. And of course, a simple avalanche doesn't explain the traces of radiation, the strange orange lights in the sky, or the bizarre, selective nature of the injuries. In 2021, a team of Swiss researchers published a detailed study using advanced snow physics modeling and even animation techniques from the Disney movie Frozen to argue that a small, delayed slab avalanche was indeed possible under the specific conditions of that night. They argued it wouldn't have been huge, but just enough to spook the hikers into fleeing. It's a compelling piece of science, but for many enthusiasts of this case, it still feels like an attempt to fit a square peg into a round hole. It leaves too many of the most disturbing questions unanswered. How does a small avalanche cause such specific, massive internal trauma with no external bruising? Why did they run a full mile away in the freezing cold instead of just digging out their vital gear a few feet away? And what about Ludmila's tongue? This leads us to a cluster of related natural theories. Paradoxical undressing. This is a well-documented phenomenon associated with the final stages of severe hypothermia. As a person freezes to death, the constricted blood vessels in their extremities can suddenly, paradoxically, dilate, flooding the skin with warm blood. This creates a powerful, overwhelming sensation of intense, burning heat. In their final, delirious moments, victims will often tear off their clothes, believing they are on fire. This could neatly explain why Krivonischenko and Doroshenko were found in their underwear by the fire. As for the missing eyes and tongue, the simple, grim explanation is scavenging animals. Foxes, birds, or weasel switch would naturally go for the softest, most accessible tissues first, especially after the bodies had been lying in a watery grave in the ravine for 3 months. This theory explains some of the evidence, but it has a fatal flaw. Confuses cause and effect. Paradoxical undressing and scavenging happen after the initial event. They are the final results of freezing to death. They do absolutely nothing to explain what caused 9 experienced mountaineers to flee their tent without their boots and coats in the first place. And while scavengers can explain missing soft tissue, the specificity is odd. Why only Dubinina's tongue? Why not more extensive damage to the other bodies? Most importantly, this theory does absolutely nothing to explain the catastrophic internal injuries or the radiation. So, let's move into more sinister territory, where human agency enters the picture. Theory number 3. A secret military weapons test. This has been one of the most popular and enduring theories, and for good reason. It has the potential to tie up several of the most bizarre loose ends. The Northern Urals in 1959 were far from empty. They were a backyard for the Soviet military-industrial complex. What if the hikers accidentally strayed into a clandestine testing ground for a new type of weapon? Perhaps a concussive weapon like a vacuum bomb that creates a powerful shockwave but little shrapnel. Or perhaps a radiological dirty bomb, or even a neutron bomb, designed to kill with radiation and pressure while leaving structures intact. This theory could explain so much. It would explain the strange orange lights in the sky, not UFOs, but parachute flares or the fiery exhaust from a missile test. It would perfectly explain the concussive, blast wave-style injuries on the final 4 victims. It would explain the traces of radiation found on their clothing. And most compellingly, it would explain the government's subsequent behavior. The swift, secretive investigation, the deliberately vague conclusion, the classified files, and the direct orders given to Lev Ivanov to shut it all down and blame nature. The state would have had every reason to cover up a disaster that killed 9 of its own young, promising citizens. Perhaps soldiers, seeing that the hikers had witnessed a top-secret test, forced them out of the tent at gunpoint, not allowing them to get their gear, and chased them into the cold to die of exposure, ensuring there were no living witnesses. But this theory, as compelling as it is, also has significant holes. If it was a conventional explosive test, where is the shrapnel? Where is the blast crater? If it was a concussive weapon, why were only 4 of the 9 so severely injured, while the others, who were in the same general area, were not? And if soldiers were involved, a professional cleanup crew, why were there no other footprints found around the tent? Why would they let the hikers run a mile away, build a fire, and even construct a den? The whole scenario feels both too clean and too messy for a professional military cover-up. It's a hiking tragedy that doesn't fit the typical profile of a state-sponsored execution. This brings us to the more fringe, but for many more compelling theories, the ones that begin to push the boundaries of conventional explanation. Let's start with the local Mansi people. The initial suspicion of the Soviet authorities immediately fell on them. Had the hikers trespassed on a sacred site? Had they angered the local tribesmen? This theory was investigated thoroughly and quickly dismissed. The autopsies showed that the nature of the violent injuries was not consistent with a human attack by axe or spear. There were no defensive wounds, and no tracks other than the hikers' own were ever found. Furthermore, the Mansi people were known to be peaceful and even actively helped in the search operation. They themselves were mystified and frightened, and spoke to investigators about evil spirits that were known to haunt the slopes of Dead Mountain. So we are forced to move further out. What about infrasound? This is a fascinating and genuinely eerie scientific theory. The idea is that under very specific wind conditions, a rare and powerful weather phenomenon called a Kármán vortex street could have been created as the fierce wind moved over the specific topography of Kolat cycle. This phenomenon can generate extremely low-frequency sound waves infrasound which are below the normal threshold of human hearing. While you can't consciously hear it, infrasound has been documented to have profound and disturbing physiological effects on humans. It can cause feelings of intense, unexplainable dread, nausea, shortness of breath, and a sense of a presence in the room. In short, pure, irrational panic. Could this have been the compelling natural force? A silent, invisible wave of pure, sound-induced terror that sent the hikers fleeing their tent in a mad, irrational dash for what they perceived as safety? It's an elegant and terrifying explanation for the initial, inexplicable panic. The problem is, it's entirely speculative. There's no way to prove it ever happened. And more importantly, infrasound doesn't break bones. It doesn't crush chests with the force of a car crash. It doesn't leave traces of radiation. And it certainly doesn't remove tongues. It explains the why they ran, but it utterly fails to explain the what happened next. And so we arrive at the final door. The one many are hesitant to open, but the one that the strange facts of the story seem to keep pushing us towards. The paranormal, the extraterrestrial, a UFO. Let's just pause and revisit the evidence through this lens. Strange, silent, fast-moving orange spheres flying in the night sky, witnessed by multiple independent groups over a wide area. Unexplained radioactive contamination on the victim's clothes. Bizarre, massive internal injuries from an immense crushing force that leaves no external trace. The feeling of a presence so terrifying that it drives 9 hardened survivors into a suicidal panic. The lead investigator of the case himself coming to believe that these flying spheres were the cause of death. In the world of unsolved mysteries, this collection of data points is what's known as high strangeness. What if the hikers witnessed something they were not meant to see, something not of this earth? Could the bright light have caused temporary blindness and panic? Could a close encounter with an unknown craft have exposed them to radiation? Could they have been struck by some kind of advanced energy field or directed energy weapon that caused the bizarre, selective internal injuries? In this scenario, the missing tongue and eyes of Dubinina and Zolotaryov take on a far more sinister, clinical, and terrifying meaning, not the random work of a scavenger, but of a deliberate, if alien, examination or mutilation. It's a wild theory, one with zero concrete, physical proof. It's the explanation you are forced to turn to when all other rational explanations have been exhausted. But in the Dyatlov Pass incident, every other explanation does seem to fail, at least in some critical way. No single rational theory accounts for all the evidence. The story seems to be a perfect storm of contradictions, a place where every logical path leads to a dead end. For over 60 years, this story has endured. It has become a modern myth, a campfire story for the entire world. Books have been written, documentaries have been filmed, and countless late-night conversations have been had, all circling the same impossible questions. In 2019, the Russian government, likely tired of the endless conspiracy theories and international attention, reopened the investigation. Their final conclusion: they doubled down on the avalanche theory, adding that poor visibility played a role in the hikers being unable to find their tent again after they fled. What we are left with is the deafening silence of the mountain, and the echoes of 9 young lives cut short in the most terrifying and perplexing way imaginable. We have the journals, the photos of their smiling faces full of hope and adventure, and then a final, horrifying scene that feels like it was ripped from the pages of a cosmic horror novel by H.P. Lovecraft. Igor Dyatlov, Zina Kolmogorova, Ludmila Dubinina, Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolevatov, Rustam Slobodin, Yuri Krivonischenko, and Yuri Doroshenko. They went into the wilderness seeking a challenge, and they found a mystery for the ages. So now I turn it over to you. After hearing all the evidence, the contradictions, the theories, where do you land? Is this a tragic but ultimately explainable hiking tragedy? A perfect storm of a freak avalanche, bad decisions, and hypothermia? Or do the strange lights, the unexplained radiation, and the impossible injuries point to something far more sinister, a secret military catastrophe and a brutal cover-up? Could it have been something as bizarre and intangible as infrasound-induced madness? Or are we, after exhausting all other possibilities, forced to consider the unthinkable that on that frozen slope in 1959, these 9 hikers had a close encounter of the most terrifying kind? The Dyatlov Pass incident remains a gaping wound in the fabric of our rational, ordered world. It's a chilling reminder that there are still corners of this planet, and perhaps corners of our reality, that operate by a set of rules we do not, and perhaps cannot, understand. It is the ultimate hiking tragedy, and perhaps the greatest of all modern Russian mysteries, precisely because any answer you choose feels incomplete. The only certainty we have is what was found on the slopes of Dead Mountain. 9 bodies, and a question that will likely haunt us, and echo through those frozen peaks, forever. I truly want to hear your thoughts. This is a case that lives and breathes in the discussion, in the sharing of ideas and the weighing of evidence. If you are as fascinated as I am by these deep dives into unsolved deaths, historical enigmas, and the mysteries that lie just beyond the edge of our understanding, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more journeys into the uncharted. Your support is what allows us to continue to explore these incredible and often terrifying stories. Thank you for joining me on this journey tonight. And the next time you look out into the vast, quiet wilderness, or up at the silent, star-filled sky, remember the 9 hikers of the Dyatlov group, and the chilling secret that the Ural Mountains have kept so well for all these years. Sleep well.